Ladies and gentlemen, moving on to the next session, which is going to be a fireside chat, and it is going to be on the topic Building in Brands for India. And I would like to call upon stage Mr. Lloyd Matthews, business strategist and angel investor, and Radhika Ghai, founder and CEO of Kind Life. Please come on the stage. Yep. Can we have mics for them? And a big round of applause for everyone who's coming on stage. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you, Nikhil, for that very inspiring presentation. Really enjoyed, I think very relevant. We've got the next 25 to 30 minutes, and I have the privilege of speaking with Radhika. And I think just briefly, the introduction, I think she's been a serial founder of some great startups, Shop Clues, which was, in fact, she was the first woman as a co-founder to, when she founded Shop Clues, that actually entered the Unicorn Club. And now she's on the mission to educate Gen Z into living a kinder life. And we'll gradually get talking about that. But just before we get deep into the conversation, I think just to reflect on some of the points that we've spoken about. I think firstly, this fireside chat sounds a little strange when we are in Delhi and NCR at 42 degrees.
It is a fireside chat.
It is. But I'm saying it's just that, when we're at 42 degrees outside, I'd rather be chatting around a cooler. So I think that's just one point. The second is really, as a bunch of communication professionals, I think being here in person is wonderful. I had the privilege of working with some or many of you actually through my career. So always wonderful, and hopefully we'll be able to, get some insights from Radhika that could be relevant to each of you. So I just want to get started, Radhika, and welcome you to this little chat, and ask you a little bit to walk us through a little bit about your journey through the two startups and life before that, and what are the key challenges. So you just want to kind of share it with this group.
Thank you, Lloyd, and it's an absolute honor to be here talking to you. Thank you. So definitely that's a big one, and I have to say, shout out to Bijoya as well. I'm always impressed, guided, and maybe a little bit intimidated by communication professionals, because you always know what's the right thing to say, and you guide us. So as entrepreneurs, especially in the startup world, we have a tendency of putting our foot in our mouth sometimes, and when we are talking to the media most of the time. So I've had a bunch of you guide us through, so thank you. Big shout out to all of them. When we decided that we'll come here, I was talking to Bijoya, we'll come here and have a chat, we're thinking about what is the right topic to talk about. And India, I've been active in the Indian startup ecosystem, the Indian consumer ecosystem for the last 11 odd years. Moved back to India in 2011 to start Shop Clues, and that's where my journey with India today started. And I'm a serial entrepreneur doing this for the third time around, actually, and find it absolutely fascinating, because I feel that the India that we came back to in 2011, where we started Shop Clues, is a very, very different country from what it is today. And I don't think that there's any other country out there that has evolved and changed so quickly. So I've had the privilege of working in India in different decades and building out companies or building out ecosystems in India that have pertained to that particular segment of audience that was coming of age at that time. And that's really how I like to think of myself, as a consumer person who rides on the dovetail of technology. My career started with, like a lot of you, with Lintas in the late 90s, very, very short stint. Went to the US, decided I wanted to do investment banking. So I'm also one of those people who believes anything is possible. Jo karna hai kar sakte ho. Why not? Try, go for it. Worked with Goldman Sachs for a very short stint. Moved back to consumer, which was my passion. Worked at Nordstrom, which is a designer store, doing strategy for them for an extended period of time. Did a startup in the Bay Area called Fashion Clues. This was 2008, 2009, which was a precursor to the recession or the downturn that we are facing today. That evolved into Shop Clues. We moved to India thinking that internet penetration is going to be like a hockey stick, a field hockey stick. It's just going to go up, 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 up. Raised money, was super excited about it, getting Bharat online. But it landed up being a bit of a journey where it landed up being more like an ice hockey stick, flat, 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 till Geo came and changed everything. That was one of the biggest catalysts that's been there in the consumer technology world. And in 2019, exited. I think the second big catalyst that happened was COVID, where wellness came up front for all of us. I'm sure everybody knows what Giloy is. Does everybody know what Giloy is? Did you know what Giloy is before COVID? Little bit. So I think wellness for us, wellness for our families, self-care came up front. And I believe that the next decade is going to be focused on that. And Kind Life is an ecosystem that we are building out for well-being. You should check out kindlife.in, shameless plug, but do check us out. The goal is to be able to bring wellness into our homes, make it easy for us to find the right products, and find the products that match our values and value for the pocket. Long introduction, but that's it.
No, that's fantastic. I think, if I can just kind of look at the three key takeaways, I think what you really mentioned was that the big point of inflection was really that 2014-15 period in the context of India, when Jio made internet services democratic, right? On the base of which today a lot of the digital economy runs. And, ironically, we've been speaking a day after the government has announced the 5G auctions. So the next few years will possibly promise a future that's even more remarkable. So that's a great point. The second, as you rightly pointed out, was what the pandemic has done. It's kind of changed the way we work, we live, and I think that's a great point out. And the third, if I may, would be, in a sense, the opening up of the funding ecosystem, right? So let's say folks who wanted to be entrepreneurs in the 90s, funding wasn't all that easy. You lined up to a nationalized bank, and it was complex. I think these days, it's far easier to be an entrepreneur, though, of course, the hurdles are much more. But also the fact that younger people today find entrepreneurship as a viable, actually not a viable, but actually the best option. And I saw that firsthand in my last corporate role at HP. We went to some of the premier institutes, and HP wasn't getting a day 1, 2, 3 status, right? A lot of smaller startups were. And when we went back and did a rethink, in each case it was, there's so much more freedom, you work in a much more fun atmosphere, you get to take decisions, and of course there's the option of wealth creation and ESOPs, but that's for another day. Just coming back to what you said, Radhika, I really want to dig a little deeper. I think one important aspect, and since we are in a room full of communications professionals, is the importance of building a narrative that can be communicated to the larger ecosystem, primarily your consumers, then of course your business partners, and more importantly in the early stage of building a business, to your investors. And how does one go about building a narrative? So in the context of, let's say, what you're doing at Kind Life, how do you get across the fact that there's a new generation that truly values living healthy, building immunity, being kind of more socially conscious with your environment? I'd like to hear that, and to what extent would you find the help of communications professionals while you're building your narrative?
So, as I talk about the narrative, let me talk a little bit about what has been my biggest learning from the fraternity that's sitting here, right? As we set out to build companies, and hopefully large companies consecutively, it's very, very important to build out the culture of the organization. And I feel there's nobody better than our current government to learn that from, right? How do you build out the culture of an organization? How do you build out a narrative? It revolves around the stories you tell, right? What is important for you? The heroes you hold high. Who are your role models? Who do you talk about? Is it Greta that we are talking about? Is it the fact that for most Gen Z, being woke is a badge of honor, It's a term that did not exist when we were growing up. And the actions we take, right? Am I conscious about what my carbon footprint is? Am I communicating that to my audience as well? So as we built out Shop Clues and now at Kind Life as well, and maybe even the culture of my home, I have two boys, and how do you build out the right mindset in them? I think these are the three things that I'm constantly looking at. The stories you tell, how do you tell them? What's the narrative? The heroes you hold high. Who are you talking about? Who are your heroes? And very important to keep your ear to the ground when you're listening to your own target audience, that who are their heroes? What are the stories they are listening to? And what are the actions that you're taking to be able to portray what you stand for? When we started at Kind Life, we know we're very, very clearly targeted towards the Gen Z, and we hear a lot of pros and cons about the Gen Z, and I see a bunch of them sitting here as well, that they are vocal about it, but you don't see that in action. They will talk about self-care, planet care, but do they really act on it? The fact is they do. I think that this is a more conscious, self-conscious, planet-conscious, eco-conscious generation than we've had before. Maybe in the 1970s, the boomers, that was a generation that believed that a change was possible. And then this is a generation that believes a change is possible. Now, if I'm building out a brand for this generation, I have to be very conscious about, back to the same terminology. What are the stories that I'm telling? What are the actions I'm taking? And what are the heroes I'm holding up high? Constantly keep going back to build the narrative around that.
Great. So just to kind of get a little deeper into that, I think a key point that I want you to kind of point out is, what are the watch-outs for a startup entrepreneur when he's getting about his task of building his communication practice? And the reason I say so is that there are two aspects. I've been a slightly old world big box marketer, and typically, the big weightage that one gave in the 90s was really to your communication through your advertising agency, right? So, most marketers spent, let's say, 80% of their time with their agency, their ad agency and such like. And very often, and I'm must confess to that, PR was like an afterthought, right? So once you build your campaign and you look at a big thing, let's call the PR guys in, and hopefully they'll help amplify the campaign. I think that has really turned on its head, I would say, pretty much in the last decade, right? Today, I think most brands, the startup ecosystem has learned to realize that the value of a well-articulated communication piece in a mainline publication is invaluable. How does one, Radhika, kind of draw the balance and use PR effectively in building your narrative? And two is, how does one temper expectations of young startup entrepreneurs? And I'll say this because I work with a bunch of them, and the belief is that, I've got, this great idea, great product, now go out and get me this story in Times of India and Economic Times, right? The world is not that simple. It won't work that way. So just some thoughts and pointers in terms of how does one temper expectations of startup entrepreneurs, and some of the learnings on this score, please.
So I'll go back to the culture piece that I talked about. When we look at the startup world in India, a little bit of a misnomer that's been there is any news is good news. Whether you're in news for being too aggressive, whether you're in news for being just plain rude, unfortunately, we are talking about heroes in the ecosystem who have not necessarily set a great example of why they want to be in the news. And that's what's happened with a lot of the incoming entrepreneurs as well. They believe that they want to be in the news, and being in the news gets you attention from your key stakeholders, right? Key stakeholders for being in the news is investors, first and foremost. second is future employees. And the third one is audience, because our belief, or the ecosystem's belief, is that your audience is someone you can reach out to by paid advertising or paid marketing, not necessarily PR. But for PR, it is mostly investors, right? I think that whole narrative or that whole story has to change. Because when you are in the news for negative things, your customers are reading that too. And we tend to forget that. And I think as PR agencies, as PR consultants, as communication specialists, and especially those who are guiding us, type A, believe anything is possible, very high risk appetite, to temper most of us down and tell us what is possible, what is not, what are the pros and cons, might sound a bit like a babysitting experience, but very, very important for us to hear that from the pros. While we understand, for me, it took me 10, 12 years to understand that media is a double-edged sword. You feel that any news is good news at that point, but it can come back to bite you at any point. I think that is a communication that's not gone through to a lot of younger entrepreneurs. And it is the job of communication specialists to make sure that they are aware about it and they hear about it. I think that's one of the most important things.
Great point. Another point I want to understand a little bit is, to what extent, how does, as a three-time entrepreneur, how do you consciously get feedback on two levels? One about your product and your offering in the marketplace, and the other is keeping a close tab on what I would call broad trends or consumer insights that sway a large part. We were chatting earlier this morning, and Radhika shared with me that one real tangible number that she could talk about in the context of Kind Life is a lot of the business is actually coming from Bharat, as we say, tier 2 and tier 3 towns. And thanks to e-commerce and deep distribution, today you're able to reach that. A startup can reach that. You don't have to be a Unilever and a Nestle to get down to 10 million outlets. How do you, as an entrepreneur, keep in track with social mores and trends that you believe are changing? One, of course, that you are addressing right now is the fact that Gen Z is far more socially conscious. They are conscious about their carbon footprint, about the environment, about doing business ethically, and so on and so forth. And maybe there are a few trends yet to merge, right? A lot of people today are comfortable working from remote towns, from small towns. They see that as a great offer. I mean, they see that a potential employer who can offer that as being far more valuable. So how do you ensure that you and your team keep close track of this? And do you expect the same from your partners, like your communication agencies?
Great question, great question. I think as we build out a business, that's really the whole foundation of the business, right? If I decide that I'm going to do something in the well-being space, why did I decide that I'm going to do something in the well-being space? We all start off with a certain hypothesis that this is going to be the next big thing over the next decade. It's my job as the CEO and founder is to keep my eyes open and have a certain vision of what's going to happen in the country over the next decade. I look at a lot of secondary research, a lot of reports to tell me, what the macroeconomic factors are going to be, what's the next decade going to look like, whether it's in terms of economic factors, whether it's in terms of demographic profiling that's going to change, psychographic profiling, et cetera, et cetera. But the rubber meets the road when you see actual numbers. I think Mr. Dave, Nikhil talked about it briefly as well, a Monday morning meeting every week to be completely transparent around the numbers. And for us, we launched on basis of secondary research. Bain ne kya kaha hai, BCG ne kya kaha hai, what are the numbers looking like, what are our GDP growth going to look like, and beautiful, right? The story is perfect over there. Our GDP is going to go from our consumption is going to go from 1.7 trillion to 5.8 trillion over the next decade. Most of this is going to be driven by the audience that we want to target, 500 million Gen Z in India. The numbers all sound fabulous and great. You start a business on basis of that, but you build a business that has to be agile and very, very lean. I think you gave a great example of the fact that for Pepsi, Ms. Nui actually caught the fact that wellness is going to be important very early on, much before Coke did. And for us, that's a very similar mindset as well. I know that well-being is going to be important. How do I know well-being is going to be important? Because I've read the numbers around that. And my job is also to intuitively sit here and see what the PR future is going to look like. How many of the people here are very, very young and are looking at a career in PR going forward? And similarly for well-being, what are the search trends that are happening, et cetera, et cetera. But when I launched, my thought process was that my total addressable market is going to be sitting in metros, large cities, because these are people who have higher awareness about clean beauty, about organic food, conscious consumption, all terms that I thought would fit my business at Kind Life. About 80% of my orders now come from smaller towns and cities, and with a very high average order value. Now, in our world, a higher average order value relates to a more premium consumer, a more affluent, a more conscious consumer. I was expecting some orders to come in from smaller towns and cities, but not to this ratio. What does this tell me? This tells me that gives me further confidence that consciousness, conscious consumption, while that's not the term that they're looking for in smaller towns and cities, but it is prevalent across the country. People want to eat better, they want to live better, and they want to consume better. I have to change my terminology, my language, to make sure I'm including those consumers in our language as well. And I think that's the most important thing. Keep your ear to the ground, see what's coming your way, and be agile enough to be able to move in the right direction.
Fantastic. And I'm just going to, get a little deeper into just one aspect of what you said. I think one part of what Kind Life is doing is really talking to this, evolving new age consumer who's recognizing the importance of, let's say, a socially more conscious existence. The other part is really building out the category, which is, as people are getting increasingly aware of this, how does one push and nudge them to recognize the value of an organic, a healthy, a more kinder lifestyle? And in the context of comms, how do you see public relations playing a role, right? One aspect is you want to build out the category, you want to make this trend come alive, and make maybe youngsters on the fence kind of get to this side. And the other aspect is you want to keep Kind Life up front and center, which is what your business is all about. How do you draw the balance on this, Radhika?
So great question, because that is my biggest challenge right now. Because what we are doing is category creation, right? There is awareness that all of this exists, but there's no awareness that you can go in and buy it from a single platform. And for us, as we look at category creation, I think it becomes more important for me, my co-founders, our brand ambassadors, to be talking about a kinder lifestyle. Make kinder lifestyle a terminology that's in the future as popular as Google it. I am a Kind Life consumer. That's very, very, very important for us. And as we look at that, I think the communication specialist coming in and helping us becomes really important, because whether it is the main press or whether it is any of the new medium that's there, whether it is YouTube, whether it is social media, I think it's, of course, the old versions of broadcast and all of that, very important for us to keep communicating about the category, that it exists. Because the first purchase, because the only truth is numbers. We're a business, we're a for-profit business. The only truth is numbers. That's about it, right? And the only truth will happen once. You will try out a product for the first time because you feel that it is aligned with your value. You'll not buy it a second time if it doesn't work for you the first time around. So my job is to tell people that try it out because it's better for you, it's better for the environment. But second time around, you want to come back. They will come back only if the product is good. So I have to be able to build that trust of the consumer on my platform, and it is impossible for me to do that without a PR, without the communication fraternity.
Yeah, and therefore, coming to the, possibly the last point is that therefore the line between PR and communication in the general sense, the advertising, the paid and the inorganic is blurring, right? So some part of what you expect from your communications firms is, mass media and, let's say get Kind Life mentioned in mainstream media. The other part is what very often goes under the broad sense of influencer marketing, which is do you get the right kind of people speaking about you, not just in mainstream media, but through social media channels and using influencers. To what extent do you see this blurring of lines between traditional communication and PR? And how do you think, let's say more PR-oriented comms folks who are in this room can navigate this?
Again, a question that I ask myself every day. I think the new word for us is amplification. And, 5 years ago at Shop Cruise, I didn't necessarily hear that word. Now it is about, everything is about amplification. Because the concentration of audience on a specific media has gone away. Whether that is print, whether that is social media, whether that is broadcast. So you can be present across many different media channels. How do you amplify that? And I feel that's the biggest support that my PR agency, my communication specialist has to give me. Amplification, amplification, amplification. Influencer marketing, फर्क नहीं पड़ता कि क्या कर रहे हैं, what we are doing, whether it is a news article, whether I'm in Mint, whether I'm in Times of India, or I'm on an influencer page, amplification is equally important. I think there was a phase in between when, I think of today's news is tomorrow's trash. You pick up the newspaper, trash it, and that's gone away, and that's gone away in a very big way. You can take today's news and live off it for the next 30 days if you amplify it the right way. And I do want to hear more of that from this industry.
So one quick, rapid fire, but quickly, what do you think would be the top 3 things you look for in a communication agency's partner?
A true partner, somebody who can brainstorm with me and understand what the space is about. The second one is a foil to what I bring to the table. I understand my business well, and feel free to come back and push back on what my understanding of your business is, because I am not the expert, you are. And the third one is actually going back to amplification. Please help us amplify anything that we do.
In closing, I just want to touch one last topic, Radhika, is really on the personal side. As an entrepreneur, lots of challenges, raising funds, hiring a team, going out, getting partners on board, seeing the trajectory of growth. The last 2 years have been uncertain, lots of setbacks, and you've lived this life, for about a couple of decades now. So if you were to look back, what are the, the 1 or 2 things you can share out here of how does one pick oneself up from those lows, right? There are lots of highs of being an entrepreneur, the spotlight, the valuations and, having people woo you. But there are also those horrible lows when you look at yourself and say, this is the amount of money I have in the bank, this is my runway, will I make it? What if I fail? How do you handle the lows?
You're right, it's been a couple of decades and I'm still learning pretty much every day. I think I have a very simple mantra, Lloyd. It sounds very, very oversimplistic, but that has held me in good stead. It is just show up. Whether I have had a good day, good year, good month, bad year, terrible day, terrible month, and being an entrepreneur is really putting yourself out there. Success doesn't come easy, because by the time success comes or you read about success, there's already so much that has happened on the personal and professional front that it's taken everything out of you. I think it is to just show up. And that's really the most important thing. And that's also important as a leader. Because when things go wrong, I've seen a few people just go into hiding. And that doesn't hold well or bode well for the team as well. So my gut is to just be there, be present with my heart and my head, and to just show up. And that's, it really levels everything out. That's it. It's done well for me, and I hope it does well for everybody who follows it.
Fabulous, Radhika. Thank you for sharing that. I think, yes, a great takeaway. Show up, stand up and be counted. Appreciate that. A great conversation. I enjoyed this chat. I hope some of you guys enjoyed this chat as well. And good wishes on Kind Life.
Thank you
Right?
so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, both the panel discussion members.